Okay, for this second video, what I wanted to do was talk about a topic just to get it out of the way. Dominance has become so pervasive and so misunderstood. It's frustrating to trainers that this theory has been misdefined and taken out of context and just caused so many problems. So I want to get it out of the way now, and we can move on to other stuff. I'm sure I'll refer to this entry several times, but for now, let's just do it. We'll get it out of the way and be done with it. I do want to preface this by saying, and I talked about this a little bit in the last video, when I first got Talbot, my first dog that was mine, not part of the family, but I had moved out and it was just me and him, I got everything I could read about dogs just to know as much as possible. I wanted to be able to communicate with him and train him in a way that he would understand. Where I was living at the time, it was a very small library, and there was literally about a half dozen books on dogs and dog training. It was very outdated. This was back in the early 90s. A lot of it was based in that dominance theory and scruffing the dog, alpha roles, all of that kind of stuff. As I read more and the research was coming out and the stuff that was already out that I came across, I realized that that was outdated. The point being, I changed my training not because I wanted to be, it's not because I was a tree hugger and I wanted to be really permissive, but because the research said this is the way they understand, this is the way they learn, this is how it should be done, this is going to be the most effective as you work with your dog and communicate with them and train them, etc. I also want to point out that I got my information, I took a 2-year course to become a dog trainer. That's not the only way to do it. I know several people who didn't, and again I mentioned this in the last video, but it's a way I chose. Read a lot about learning theory and communication, evolution. That's where my biggest interest has been. I've read the research. There is no research out there that I have come across, and I have looked, that says dominance is a motivating factor for dogs. So as I go through this, you'll see what I'm talking about. Big thing, well, and back up. This is a presentation that I've given before, and it's kind of modified for this format. So there'll be slides coming up, as you'll see in a moment. But learning to train dogs from watching a TV show is like learning to raise your kids from watching a TV show. A lot of misinformation is disseminated by sensationalized television. So my intention is to clarify what we mean when we talk about dominance. University of Bristol did a great study. It's several years old now. I forget exactly how old, but it was called Dominance in Dogs. What's it called? Dominance in Dogs, Useful Construct. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. Dominance in Dogs, that'll get you there, University of Bristol. But what they said was dominance has been erroneously used to describe a supposed trait of individual dogs, even though there's little evidence to support it. It doesn't describe a relationship, but is erroneously used to describe motivation, like I said a few minutes ago, or a moment ago. So look at the history of dogs real quick. During the Pleistocene era, which for our intents and purposes, it's when humans were hunter-gatherers. They moved around a lot, didn't really have time to domesticate dogs. However, the dogs were probably following those groups because they were eating the same food. They were following the same herd, so there was some interaction there. The dogs that were coming closest to the humans when they camped, we call it a short flight distance. They weren't running away from the humans as far or as quickly as some of the other dogs. So those dogs, because they were in proximity to each other, they would breed. They would pass on that trait to make calmer dogs. And I will mention You look up Belyov's, I think I'm saying that right. If you look up his study on foxes, you can see how this trait can be passed on. It's a really interesting study. I think PBS did a documentary about it. Really interesting stuff. But anyway, so during the Neolithic period, when humans became agrarian, when they started settling and building villages, we'll call them, started growing crops and things like that, they had more time to devote to dogs. But still, if you have a dog that's dominant or trying to be aggressive or take over, they're not going to have time for that. They're going to kill those dogs off, probably eat them. Again, the ones with the shorter flight distance are the ones that are going to stay around. The ones that are very personable and want to engage with the humans, they're the ones that are going to be together close to those camps. Those are the ones that are going to stick around. The humans are going to adopt and make our domestic dogs today, or what will become our domestic dogs today. So, very important to understand. The whole alpha concept came from Dr. David Mech. It's spelled M-E-C-H. He was doing research in the late 60s on wolves. Coined the term alpha wolf when he wrote his book, The Wolf, The Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. Later came out and said that was wrong. It was based on erroneous research. What we have is wolves, what was called the alpha male, alpha female, are actually parents. The rest of the pack is their children. So it's a family. And of course, mom and dad, they're at the top, make the rules, all of that kind of stuff. There's the argument that, well, the hierarchy or the alpha changes. Well, no, what we're seeing is if the wolves go on a hunt, for example, the one that's best in tracking, he's going to be first. He's going to be going along, leading everybody else. And then the one that's better at chasing, he's going to take over. Everybody else is going to drop back and follow him or them. And then the one that's better at killing, once they've tired the animal out, that one's going to take over, take the predominant position or the lead position, and so on. The thing to keep in mind is when they finally take down their prey, a lot of times, most of the time, the puppies will eat first. So that totally disrupts the whole alpha concept, the alpha theory. The puppies, they want to perpetuate this species. Puppies are going to eat first. They need to be taken care of. The other thing to keep in mind is when the puppies reach sexual maturity, they leave the pack. Usually they leave the pack. Of course, there's always exceptions to these rules, and we're not going to go into. That's not really. We're not going to be able to go into all of that in the amount of time I'm trying to take to explain this. But the puppies, once they reach sexual maturity, they leave the pack. They go and they form their own packs. Okay, so scientists have even gotten to the point where they've gotten rid of the alpha male, alpha female, and they've started calling them the mating pair. So, how does that apply to dogs? Well, research with dogs has shown that they are scavengers. One of the examples, a lot of research has been done on the dogs in Romania, where the events conspired that the dogs had to be released. Family dogs, pet dogs, they were released. I don't want to say they were put in the wild, but they were left to roam the city streets however they chose. What they found was they were not forming packs. They were forming, Dr. Ian Dunbar calls it loose transitory associations. What that means is dogs would come together, occasionally spend a couple of days together, and then they would go their separate ways. The only time you would see dogs together in large numbers, forming a pack, quote unquote, is when either females were in estrus or food sources were scarce. So there's only one food source, so all the dogs gathered at that place. They don't even form packs. The thing about dogs is the male, once they've had sex, they leave. They don't help raise the puppies. It's rare that you see that. So another good example is Cook Island, where there's a lot of dogs running loose, do whatever they want to do what dogs do. We've seen this here also. I can't remember the name of the island, but Lorna and Ray Coppinger did a really good book called Dogs, New Understanding, blah, blah, blah. Very long title, but I can't remember the name of the island, but they did a lot of research on this also that shows the same thing. It just doesn't happen. So how do we define dominance? David Meach, again, Dr. David Meach put it really concisely when he said dominance is not a personality trait, but an aspect of a relationship. So it's not like the dog comes in and says, I'm going to be dominant and lead and rule and be in charge. It's aspect of a relationship. Put it in simpler terms, my wife and I, we go out for pizza and beer. My wife doesn't like beer. She loves pizza. So, say for example, there's one beer left, one slice of pizza left. My wife is probably going to get that slice of pizza, not because she's dominant, but because I submit. I let her get that slice of pizza. Likewise, I love beer. It's one of my favorite things. One, she doesn't like beer. Two, she's allergic to alcohol. So she's going to let me have that beer. Again, I am not dominant because I'm asserting myself. I am dominant because she has submitted. Okay, it's the same thing with when we had Puck, a terrier we used to have. Duncan, the Brittany that's still with us, he loves tennis balls. My wife calls it his crack. He is just obsessed with tennis balls. Puck, he's a terrier. He doesn't care. So Duncan is dominant, not because he wants it more, so to speak, but because Puck doesn't really care. He's not willing to fight for it. The inverse is true, where Puck was terrier. He liked tug toys. He liked things that moved fast and was stringy and that type of thing. Duncan doesn't care. He still doesn't care about those types of things. So he, again, made Puck dominant because he submitted. Rarely do you see a dog or a wolf alpha roll somebody, another dog or another wolf, respectively. What you see, and watch very closely, is one dog will roll over and submit, show his belly. And it's a way of saying either, hey, what I just did, I didn't really mean it, I'm not going to follow it up with aggression, I was just playing, or it's what we call a tap out, where the dog's like, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm not going to do anything, just leave me alone. If you see another dog, if you see a dog or a wolf roll another individual, that is very aggressive behavior. Basically, it's scaring the hell out of the dog that's being rolled over, because the dog that has done the rolling, usually they're going to kill the other animal. It doesn't always happen, but that's the intent. That's where it comes from. And if you think about wolves, if they harm or they kill another pack member, they're not going to be able to hunt efficiently. They're not going to survive because everybody's injured. They can't chase down this prey as a group like they're intended to. And if we take dogs being descendants of wolves, they've carried that trait down with them, which we do know now for sure that they are descended from wolves, which is a totally different topic, which I won't even get into. But David Meach, who's been working with and is still working with wolves, last number I heard, he said he's seen 3 actual alpha rolls since he's been working with wolves in the 60s. I have been around dogs all my life, trained them, started about 25 years ago, just my personal dogs. 10 years ago, I started working professionally with dogs, give or take. I have seen 1 alpha roll, what I would call an alpha roll, in that time. So we can get rid of that theory also. Dr. Sophia Yin, I will come back to that. Okay. Well, I don't paraphrase it, but the slide will be up. And it's an animal behavior dominance is defined as a relationship between individuals that is established through force, aggression, and submission in order to establish priority access. And that goes back to the beer and pizza or the tug toy and the tennis ball. I want it more. I don't want it as much. So it's worked out. A relationship is not established until one animal consistently defers to the other. Now, this brings up another interesting point, is people will say, well, he was dominating the bed or dominating the food. That is resource guarding. That is fear of losing, how did I put it? Fear of losing comfort or safety. So it's a totally different behavior that needs to be addressed differently. And again, I won't get into that. That may be a topic for another video, but for now, I think that covers everything. So that is it in a nutshell. This is a nice little 10-minute presentation that I had put together. I think I went a little bit longer than that, 20 minutes. But I added my preface. So just end up again with David Meach and his quote, "Dominance is not a personality trait, but an aspect of a relationship." So I will say, I just had someone in one of my classes not too long ago tell me, we were talking about this a little bit, and she said, well, I've heard arguments both ways. Yes, you have, but it has become so ingrained in pop culture and pop science. The research is out there. I don't know how to emphasize this anymore. The research is out there. Read it. Look at it. Don't just rely on a television show that's trying to get ratings and sell products with their commercials. Don't just rely on me. Don't rely on these other trainers who say, well, this has always worked and this is the way I do it and so it must be right. Punishment will work, but there's going to be so much fallout from it. There's going to be so many. PTSD, for example, would be an extreme example of what can possibly happen using these methods. The thing is, if you go with what's termed as force-free, where you're working with the dog without using aggression or force, they learn the stuff better, and when they learn it, they're going to do it better, they're going to do it faster, they're going to do it longer. You're going to get a much better response, whereas if you're using aggression, dominance, force, the dog is only going to do enough not to get punished. And really, when you think about it, do you want a dog that is always scared and intimidated, or do you want a dog that's happy and wants to do for you because you've asked them to, not because you are forcing them to? So, want to mention again, if you haven't checked it out, check out my book, My Journey. I do have another one that's about to come out, hopefully within the next month. I'm waiting for a few edits to come back, and it should be published late May, early June.